Okay, hi, it's Steve Bradshaw here. We're back to take another look at a Power10. This time we're going to do a physical walk around the server. We're going to start at the front end, switch to the back end, and then take a look inside. I'm ably assisted by my partner Claudia, who may chirp up at some points during this video to tell me that things need to be moved into shot or I need to come out of shot. I'll be as quick as I can, but if you want to know more about a particular part, of course you can scrub forward and backwards. So we're going to start with the beautiful end of this Power10 server. This particular server is the 1014 4-core, the P05 model. Right? So I'll say P05 and P10, and when I'm talking about that P10, I'm not talking about the power server, I'm talking about the IBM processor grouping of it. So with this particular P05 entry-level machine, I'm limited to 64 gigs of RAM, 2 of these NVMe storage bays, a single processing chip, and 4 cores. More on that later, okay? These come in 2 form factors. So this is the rack mounted one, and the other was the tower mounted one. So if you want to know what a tower one looks like, take a look at the Power 9 unboxing video. I looked at a Power 9 in a tower module. It's essentially the same server inside. It's just whether it's freestanding on the floor or it's going into a rack. All right, so let's look at the beautiful end. On the front here, we have some storage bays. We have some blowers. We have this USB 3 here, which is for connecting up optical media or indeed a USB thumb drive. So most commonly people are putting thumb drives in here for doing small backups or getting media data on and off the server, or they're connecting up a DVD drive, but other things can be connected. This hole you see at the front here, I'll show you one of those on the back as well, more on that later, bit of suspense. Okay, so and then as we move across, we've got the SRC panel. That will be showing you any system and reference information, any error code, status information. That is becoming optional on these devices now. Still seeing them on all the machines that are rolling out at the moment, but that might be something that disappears in the future because, of course, you can get this information now through a network cable. But still nice to have. Moving over to this side here, we've got the power button. This is how we're going to turn it on, and 3 status information lights. There's one for whether there is electricity to it, one for the system attention light, so the amber light that says you've got something that's an issue, and then a blue light that gets your attention to say this is the server that I'm looking for. And then underneath that is a pin reset. I have no idea what that's for at this point. What is it that I would be resetting if I pressed it? I'll find out another time. Down here, as well as telling me which model I have, there is some model information and a serial number, still written in a font that I can't possibly read without my glasses on. So hey, who said power wasn't for the next generation? And then we've got some status information lights for each of the blowers underneath, the fans. What is he talking about, blowers and fans? Well, if you want to get the front off, a firm pull takes the fascia off, and now we can see these blowers. So there's either going to be 5 or 6 blowers depending on which of the models you've got. So if I've got an extra processor in that side, the 2 processor module, I'm sure that there would be a blower there as well. Then the blowers across the bottom. That little blue tag if I want to take the blower out, because these can actually be exchanged whilst the machine's on. Right. The thing that calls it a blower rather than a fan is that this is vertically mounted. If you look into the end of that as I spin that round, I don't know if you can see that clearly, it goes that way around rather than a traditional fan. By doing that, it creates less vibration and less electrical noise, and it gives a smoother airflow. There's 2 lights on there. Green one is good, amber light is bad. So if a blower was to fail, you'd be able to work out which of your many blowers it was that had failed and swap it out. So to pop it back in, make sure that the arm is extended, not in that position. Push it in, and then click, goes back in. If it's any harder than a click, you're putting it in wrong. You haven't got it lined up, you've got it upside down. All right, so on the front here, on this P05 model, I am limited to 2 of these NVMe, non-volatile memory express storage devices. There are no spinning disks in a Power10. If you want to put spinning disks in there or old-fashioned SSDs, they've got to go in an expansion drawer. To get the device out, pull on the top there, the arm comes forward. As the arm extends, you can then take it out. So this may look like a traditional disk, and it may have similar componentry inside here to an SSD, but the way we access that data with NVMe is much, much faster. That's the thing you need to remember. It's cheaper and faster. You want to know more about it? I've done a video just on NVMEs, so just take a look of what's all the fuss about NVMe. Right, this P05 model, the entry-level 4-core model, even though I've got 8 bays in here that are enabled, and we'll see the enabling inside in a moment, I can only physically have 2 disks in there because it's the base model. If this was the P10 processor group, so the Power10 with an 8-core module, then all 8 of these would be enabled by default, and I could then put another adapter in and enable the next 8. And over here, these are not for NVMEs. Let me just put that one back in, so slide it back in, push it until it's level, and then push the arm back up, and it should click, and it should be perfectly level with the others. This last 8 over here is for the RDX optional bay, so if you've got RDX exchangeable disks, they'd sit behind here. I'll rip a few of these out. If you were to look behind there, can you zoom right in behind it? There's just a metal plate because there's no RDX option in here. If there was, this wouldn't be here, and then you'd see the RDX componentry. Let me just plug that back in. Now, I said that I can only use 2, but if you were to look behind here, all 8 are actually enabled, i.e. there is a slot at the back they could plug into. So if you have the P10 8-core module, you can actually put more of these NVMEs in, and you always mirror them. There is no RAID controller that actually groups these together for hardware RAID. These present as actual devices themselves. Each of these could be 8 or 16 disks that get virtually presented. We'll cover how that works, these namespaces, in a different video. But just bear in mind for now, these go in the front. You always want them in pairs for IBMI, and they always want to be the same size, and they'll be mirrored rather than hardware rated. To get this front cover back on again, just line this up and then give it a push. You'll hear the clicks and it's there. Right, so there's the beautiful end. Let's go and take a look at the business end of the machine. Not a lot to show you on the sides. Oh, let's just push that back again. Other than the weight restriction and the handles for when you're moving it around. And these lugs for getting on the rails. More on that in other videos another time. So this is the business end of the server. Because it is the single processor Power10, this left-hand side is not enabled. So that's why they put that big blanking plate there. I mentioned about that mystery part on the front. Well, there's another one on the back here. It's got a green circle around it. Any clues yet? Now there's the earthing point. There are several components inside this server which are extremely sensitive to static electricity. So if you're working inside it and you're actually touching any of that componentry, make sure you're earthed, okay? I'm going to take the lid off, but I'm not actually going to be touching or removing any of the parts that are actually static sensitive. So I'm going to stay away from those. Okay, so this at the top here, that's the exhaust port. We saw those 5 blowers on the front. Air's got to come somewhere. So we got the cool air in the front. It's running across the componentry and it's being expelled out these ports at the back. In the middle here, we've got our power supplies. So this particular model only needs 2 power supplies. So these are the 1600 watt power supplies. Okay, they are indeed swappable. That's what IBM calls its titanium grade. That's not to do with the metal so much as its efficiency. So these are more efficient than the power supplies that used to go into the Power 9. What do they mean by that? They waste less electricity converting the AC to DC. So these machines effectively are more efficient, not just because the processors are better and more efficient, not because we just don't have spinning disks, but also because we waste less electricity converting the AC to the DC. All right. This particular one, because it only has the one processing module, only needs 2 power supplies. There are 2 other bays in there where you could have another 4 power supplies. I only need 1 of these to be working in order for this server to work, so I can have redundant power. If I have 4 power supplies in there, I need a minimum of 2, doesn't matter which 2, to be working to keep the server up. Okay, so just working our way across. Next, we've got the EBMC. So this is the next generation of the hypervisor. We had FSPs before, flexible service processors. Now we have the EBMC, which does the same job, but has a few more features in it. I'm still quite new to the EBMC myself. I've been using it in the new HMCs for a while. So we'll do another video on some of those features and how it looks different another time. But these network cards here, and also the USBs, that is for the EBMC. I got a feeling that one of those two USB ports actually could be used as an LPAR connector. I'll confirm that in another video. This slot here, C6, there is actually no connector behind it, so you can't use that slot. So we've only got 5 slots where we can put PCI cards in. And that one is taken with the NVMe controller. So we're going to have a minimum of 4 of the slots we can add. We also must have at least 1 Ethernet, so we're down to 3. So there's less slots available to you in one of these smaller power servers. That sounds terrible, but actually in a typical machine with a small configuration like this, normally you might have a couple of network cards for redundancy and maybe a tape controller. So actually IBM's thought about this and there is enough. If you did have the P10 model, and I'm in the P10 processing group where you could have that extra set of NVMEs in the front, that next 8, then you would also lose another one of these slots, so bear that in mind. But you'd still have enough, even with those 2 in place there. That'll be 16 storage devices in the front, 2 network cards and a SAS adapter or fiber adapter for your tape. That still feels like enough. If it's not for you, then just get the 1024 module and we can get all of these cards over here enabled as well. All right, so we've worked our way across. It's time to take a look inside the machine. All right, so in order to actually get into the machine, let's just turn it out to the beautiful end again. You'll see you've got this single lever here. Push the blue button, lift it back, and then it's going to lift straight up. Okay. There is an incredibly useful diagram on the top here that explains the locations of all of the cards' memory slots, even where the battery sits. You say, well, it's obvious where the battery sits. Well, that may be true, but you're going to find out there's 2 batteries in there, so that tells you which of the batteries you might want to change. All right, let's pop that out of the way. Next thing you might notice is you've got this big plastic reservoir on the top. I understand it's called an air dam. Its purpose, we have those blowers at the front here that are pushing air through. This piece of plastic guides the air to where it needs to go. So we've got a reservoir around the Power10 chip itself, some going over the memory modules, and then channeling it out the back. So that is a very important piece of plastic. If you ever take it out, make sure you put it back, otherwise there is a good chance your server might overheat. That would not be a good thing. All right. So, the Power10 bit itself, there it is. Now this big chunk of metal, that's not actually the Power10. Is it better if I bring it that way for you? Okay. All right, so that's the heatsink. The Power10 sits underneath it. You might notice that it's a bit coppery from the side, sort of that orange color, and then it goes a different color as it goes up into that alloy part. So that's copper, designed to draw the heat out really quickly. And it changes to an alloy to slow down the dissipation. So the idea is we get the heat away from the chip as quickly as possible, slow it down at the top here, and as the air goes across it, it'll take the heat away. Okay, this is an incredibly expensive part of the machine, this Power10 chip itself that sits under there. So as part of the protection, as well as getting the air flow through in the right way, we have this little beauty here, which is called the VRM, the voltage regulator module. It effectively is a giant, very clever fuse. If the voltage in any way, shape or form goes outside of tolerance, this smooths it out. If it can't smooth it out, it literally commits suicide so that this device is undamaged. So this is there to protect your server in the unlikely event that some catastrophic power event happens. Either you pushing too much in or one of those power supplies has a bad day. Okay, so RAM. Many of you will be looking at this and where the heck are the RAM modules? Normally they stand up vertically and you see them everywhere. If you've got the Power10 P10 module, the one with the two, if you've got the Power10 1024 module where you've got two processors in there, you can have up to 32 of these modules. So that chip would be occupied, and you'd see RAM sitting under here and here, as well as over here. As I've just got the smaller machine, I've only got this one section here where I can have RAM modules. There's up to 8 of them that I can use. So to get at the RAM, excuse me, you push these blue bits in, and this top now lifts off. Now, unlike other RAM in previous generations, these are not standard DDR, and I'm told that these are now only to be exchanged by an IBM service engineer. So I'm not going to even touch these two RAM modules that I have. So each of those has got 32 gigs of RAM on it. But I will lift out one of the blanking plates in the middle there, because that's quite safe. Now that blanking plate just allows you to look down and you can see the connector for the RAM. So I've got the ability to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 RAM modules in there. Okay, all right. Let's just slide that back in so that it's out of the way. If I had got the P10 module, I'd be able to put more RAM in here. So I've got a 64 gig limit on this particular machine. As of shipping, the limit for the next generation of the Power10, I think, is 512 gigs, and that'll go up to 1 terabyte. And then that goes up massively when you get into the 1024s, where you can use this one and this one, where there's 32 of those modules available. Okay, the NVMEs I talked about on the front, just for reference, even though this is a baby one, so I've only got a pair of 3.2 terabytes in there. If you were to have the next generation up, you could have up to 102.6, I think, if I'm remembering it, terabytes of storage just in that front section alone. Okay, so you can get a massive amount of storage that's incredibly fast inside a single unit right now. Oh, what else do we want to talk about? So let's get to the PCI at the back. If I turn it around that way so you can see a little better. You can shoot in from the top, please, Claudia. Right, so I mentioned to you that the EBMC, okay, this is the virtualization layer, that's sat in that first slot there. Okay, then I've got a blank one, so I told you that that one can't be used right now. Next to that, I've got my network adapter card. Then I've got my tape controller, a free port, so you can see the bus down there where the PCI bus, that PCI 5 that we can plug into. PCI 5 adapters are ready to go in this machine. There aren't many PCI Generation 5 adapters available right now, but they will be over the life of this machine. And 5s are twice as fast as 4s. So it's good to have that future enablement for the life of this server. This is the NVMe controller I mentioned. Okay, and then another blank space there if I want to add another card. So that NVMe controller, this is how those devices, those really fast NVMe storage devices, actually get plugged in to the PCI bus. So that vertical card there is the NVMe controller, and that will enable up to 8 of the NVMEs in the front to present onto the PCI bus. There are cables at the side here, these little green nails on. They go behind the machine, so just track forward with me here, following the pen. Okay, that cable goes along, and you'll see there are 4 different connectors. So these 4 enable those 8 bays on the front. If I was to have the next set of 8, then in that section there, you'd see another 4 of these cables, and they would run down the back and go into the next slot over there. So that's why when you've got the 16 enabled on the front, you lose 2 of your PCIe slots. Just bear that in mind when you're doing your configurations. Now at the front here again, that N1, if you have my RDX, then that would be in here and making use of some of these plugs on the front for power and data access. So that's where you have the RDX exchangeable. We mentioned that the 2 batteries, so this is the VRM, so that's the vital information, so where your serial number exists, what functions are enabled on your Power10 from a virtualization point of view, and there's a battery that backs up that information there. And if we look at this battery here, that's the one that's keeping the date and time. Okay, so when there's no power to it, it keeps the clock ticking along. All right, what else is there that's worth talking about in here? Right, so you need to make sure that when we ship a box, that nothing is, when the box is shipped to you, that nothing is shaken loose. So we're just going to make sure all of these are sitting nice and flat. Great. If you ever did want to take one of these cards out, so let's say I want to get that PCI card out, you lift that up first before pulling the card out. But I am not earthed at the moment, so I'm not going to do that. If you ever need to do an exchange of the motherboard, God forbid that you have to, they now even tell you there are 3 different types of bolts that are used, and they tell you with these little diagrams as to which length and where they go on the motherboard. It's great. I think that's IBM doing it more for their engineers than for us end users. But very, very useful to know. All right, so we need to get our plastic air down back in there. Remember, when you're popping this back in, this edge ports toward the front, and these locators here, these little sticky outy parts, go into these holes here. So let's just make sure that those line up. There's one there, one there, one there, one there. That sits underneath that little flap there. Keep the airflow through. Make sure to sit nice and level. Pop the lid back on the top. And if the lid is correctly lined up, it's just 1 finger depression to push it down. If that doesn't go down smoothly, you haven't got the lid on. I really hope that was a useful first introduction, first view of the Power10. If there's anything particular you would like to know about it, please let me know, and I will try and cover that in a subsequent video. In the next video, I'm going to take a look at the EBMC itself and see how that differs from the FSP in the past. So, hope you've enjoyed it. TTFN.